and hope I'm not into the right. And I'm like, I speak Spanish. I
don't speak your Spanish.
Yeah, it's like a little fast, and just like some slang that's thrown in there. Oh, when the slang gets thrown in, I ended up finding like these books. Oh, I love them. I cherish them now. And it's just like books about like Puerto Rican sayings or Puerto Rican slang.
Yeah.
And I just like looked through them. Oh, okay. And very nostalgic too, because it's like a lot of things that my mom would say or my dad. Like my mom would say, "Los pájaros le quieren disparar a la escopeta," and I'm like, what? And it's like, like birds are now trying to shoot at the guns, and it's and stuff that some of it gets lost in translation, but it's just real cool to be like, oh, okay, I get it now.
It's funny that the kids in my job, like especially the kids with like there's certain names that I'm embarrassed to pronounce because I told you the story. Spanish class, freshman year of high school. My name is Brian. There's no translation in Spanish to Brian. Like, if you're Ralph, it's Rafael, So she's like, you're going to have to pick a Spanish name. So I'm like, Josue. She's like, no, it's Joseph. And we already have a Joseph. And you're Louis. So I'm Louis. I'm like, okay. I don't know if I like Louis. I don't know if that would be my first choice. Like, you told me I had a choice. So then, like, halfway through the year, she's like, you'll never be able to speak Spanish. You can't roll your R's. I can't. So I remember, after my freshman year, I passed the class barely, like a C-. I would have, if she had pumped me up, I would take Spanish too, because I always wanted to speak another language. But I was embarrassed. You want to talk about teachers make the stuff that they do when you're young following you? To this day, when I get kids in classes with like very, I don't want to say this because it's like hard to pronounce names, I'll be like, how do you pronounce it? And they'll say it a certain way, and I'm like, I can't even, I'm not doing it. I'm just gonna call you by your first name. And they're like, well, mister, it's easy. And I'll do it. And I'm like, but I sound white when I say your last name. It's like por favor. No, it's, and I'm like, I can't. And it's all based on like, a teacher telling me. So it's funny to me. So it's
like the power of it. Like if a teacher tells you.
But it's funny because it's like I always wanted to speak. It didn't matter what language. I always wanted to speak another language. That's the first language I tried, and it's like you can't roll your R's. What's wrong with you? I'm like, and then there's just. It's almost like there's a naturalness to that, and then there's like me trying to. And so it's funny how I'm so embarrassed to sound white saying it. And even some of the kids will be like, Mr. P, what did you just say? I'm like, God, that's not how you say it, Mr. P. This is how you say it. And that's disrespectful. You're not supposed to. And I'm like, should I put a por favor then? And they're like, yeah, but it's por favor. And I'm like, I can't do it,
por favor.
Yeah, because the way, when I say it, the way it sounds, it almost feels like I'm stealing. Like so it's weird. It's like, and then I start laughing because then I ask the kids, I'm like, is that how you feel like when you speak English? And they're like, yeah, it feels like I'm trying to sound like you. And I'm like, oh, I get it now. Like that awkwardness of like trying to communicate. And so I was laughing because that's just, that's a funny little stupid story in my own self.
The thing I like being able to speak Spanish is that when I do have a student like that, and they're uncomfortable speaking English, but I find like sometimes I'll like jump into Spanish real quick, like for them, and then bring it back into English,
and then they're more comfortable.
And they're a little more comfortable, and sometimes they'll get stuck because they don't know how to say something in English, and so they'll say it in Spanish, and then okay, this is what you're trying to say. And okay, I got it, and they're learning, they get to learn like that.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me because I remember the first year I taught because Lincoln's the ELL school. So I had to cover an ELL class, so that's fun, right? Like when you're like first year teacher, here, you're covering the ELL class, and you're like, well, what am I supposed to tell them? Like, right? So, like one of the kids was like, Mr. P? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, it's embarrassing trying to speak English because people will make fun of you. And I thought about it for a second. I go, can I tell you something? I said, I'm gonna give you a sneak peek at something. And they go, what? I go, so you know how to speak Spanish and you pretty much know how to speak English. It's just a raw version,
Yeah.
right? You're like if I was, you'd be like a 8-year-old in English, but you're 16 in Spanish, right?
Yeah.
They go, yeah. I go, you're already smarter than me. And they're like, what are you talking about? I go, you know 2 languages. I know 1. What does that tell you? And I go, so that's why I laugh when those people are like, go back to your country or speak English. I'm like, they know how to speak English too, which means they're smarter than you yelling at them. Right? And it's funny because the kids will cuss in class, and I know every cuss word in Spanish. Like, I can't, there's certain things I can follow, like when you're speaking, and I'm like, I know exactly what that means. So just a facial expression, I'm like, oh, okay. But I remember one time, this kid said, is it cabron? Whatever the ass means, right? And what's the word for ass? Culo, that's what it is, right? So this,
Like,
so
Pitbull,
I'm like,
just remember the Pitbull song.
oh
Culo.
yeah. So I said, stop cussing. And he goes, well, Mr. P, I'm not cussing because I said this before it, so it doesn't mean the same thing. And I'm like, you're just lying because you know I don't speak Spanish. So the Spanish teacher comes back and I go, well, he said this. And she goes, did he say this before? And I go, yeah. And she's like, so it's not a cuss. So I went back to the kid and I go, I was like,
do you remember what he was saying?
I forgot what he was saying, but it was like, it was in the term that he meant, it meant butt, not like ass or some like it like, because it was like 4 or 5 years ago. But I just remember sitting there and going, oh, sort of like dear means one or dear means plural. Like, it depends on how you use it. And so it's just funny to think like these kids need to be told that it's like, listen, you know 2 languages. You know how many people in this country don't know 2 languages, and they're the same ones that are going to yell at you that you're not smart enough or that your accent is weird. But what actually breaks my heart is looking at my family history and wondering why we don't speak Polish anymore. And my grandmother, my father's mother, was the last person that had broken Polish. And it was because they were forced to, like, it was like almost like we can't be different. So we have to learn English. And if that means, and it breaks my heart because when I follow that, I look at a lot of kids today that come into school and they're translating for their parents because their parents are Spanish speaking and they know English, but they forget a lot of the words in learning English. So they're like, you know, you could hear them say in like Spanish how you say, you know, like, but I forgot what the
Como se dice.
Yeah. And I know what that means. It's just weird to know something but can't communicate back. So you're like, you just shake your head and you're like, you know, and but it's interesting to see that and realize, like, in making people learn a new language, we're almost stripping them.
And it's like with my own girls, like my oldest understands Spanish more than my younger daughter, but she herself is not very comfortable in speaking it. And so, like, you know, visiting my family in Puerto Rico, she'll try to, you know, a couple of words here and there, but I could see that she's very unsure of herself, kind of almost like scared,
intimidated. Almost.
Because she doesn't want to mess up, so she'd rather not speak anything. But it's like, you know, and I feel like, oh my goodness, you know, I'm failing her as a parent because, you know, and people are like, well, why don't you speak, you know, Spanish at home? But the thing is that, like, you know, I grew up speaking English, and my wife, she came from Honduras when she was like 9, and, you know, she already spoke English in Honduras, so, you know, we're just more comfortable speaking English. And then many times, like, I'll lapse into Spanish with my wife just to kind of like try to get my girls to hear more Spanish. And my wife's, I'm putting the blame on my wife. She'll be like you bastard, but like she'll lapse into English. Like she just like, because she'll get frustrated when she doesn't remember how to say something in Spanish. She'll just switch right back to English. And it's just because, you know, and at least for me, when I go visit, you know, my family in Puerto Rico, I come back and I feel like I'm super fluent in Spanish, and I'm just. And
but does it make you feel good? Like
you're proud of
yeah,
you have that little pride, but then as the year goes by, and I don't
like out of sight, out of mind type.
Yeah, and you know, I will call, you know, Puerto Rico like once a week, and, you know, just like an hour, you know, but that's not enough. It's like you have to immerse yourself in it.
Yeah,
and so I find when I'm in Puerto, and even when I go to Puerto Rico, my sister will speak to me mostly in English. But my friend David, that's why I like hanging out with him, because he's the one that, you know, he challenges me. He's like, and I gotta listen, I gotta respond, and You know, recently I found, like, when he texts me, my daughter's like, "Dad, you're cheating," because I'll respond back to him, but I'll put it in Google
Translate.
Yeah, and even Google Translate won't translate exactly the way I want it to be translated.
It's almost like proper,
but it'll
right?
Yeah, but then I'll go in after it and I'll fix it to the way I want to say it. And I told my daughter, it's just faster for me to do it this way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I almost feel like it's helping me, like brush up on my Spanish, get back into it. But with my older brothers, they grew up speaking English, but they knew Spanish because my grandmother didn't speak any English at all. And when she passed away, that's it. They didn't have to speak Spanish anymore. And
now, did your parents speak English in the house, or did they speak Spanish?
No, my mom, she came from Puerto Rico, I think when she was 14 or 15, so she ended up learning English in high school.
Okay.
And, graduated from high school. But my dad, he came from Puerto Rico, I want to say in his early 20s. And he came looking for work because the job or the factory he was working in Puerto Rico, they laid him off. And his brother lived in Philadelphia. And he's like, well, you're not working right now. Why don't you come? There's work in Philadelphia. And so my dad came over in his 20s. And then he ended up not liking Philadelphia. He said it was boring.
Yeah.
And so he went to New York.
Sorry, even though I love that city, I could say it's not because it's not big. Like if you look at Philadelphia, is very small for the amount of people that's there. Yeah. It is very small, and the neighborhoods are different. Mm-hmm. It feels almost like if you're not used to it. Have you ever been to Philadelphia?
Yeah, once or twice as a tourist.
Like when you go, it feels
Independence Hall.
Yeah, but if you go even on the back streets, it feels almost constricted.
I went to what is it, Geno's?
But those streets are very like. Even my wife was like, "This is very narrow." New York's open. There's like 4-lane, one ways, and then you go there, and it's almost like you ever see obviously you grew up there, but like the brownstones, how it's like that one way, and everybody parks on both sides. You have that narrowness. That's a normal street. Yeah, and then you go to New York, and New York is just like,
and then so my father, he went to Manhattan, and he fell in love in the Spanish Harlem, El Barrio.
Yeah,
and that's where his friends from Puerto Rico, a lot of his friends were there, and Jacobo, childhood friend, they're roommates and over there, but I think because his friends were, they're all the people he grew up with in Puerto Rico in Vega Alta, he didn't really have to speak much English, but he ended up getting work as a presser, and he worked with the Italians. He said there was a lot of Italian and Polish people that worked. And my dad picked up some Italian. He spoke probably as much Italian as he spoke English.
Well, because it's kind of weird when you look at like Portuguese, Italian, like that like there's a similar, like certain words are similar. It's kind of weird, but Italian, huh?
And so I remember him like when he went to me to do something faster. Supido, and I was like, what the heck? And he's like, oh, that, and because at the factory. The Italians are like, hey, faster, and so my dad would pick up some stuff there. But we always teased my dad because we're like, man, Dad, you lived, in New York since what the 60s, the late 60s, mid 60s, and he lived there until 1990, and he could, if he had to communicate, he could. But we always used to joke that it sounded like Tarzan, like. But that was the extent. And it was just because, he knew enough to get by at his job, and the people he socialized with all spoke Spanish. And so he never had to. And we my sister and I would crack up when he would, like say shit. But, he'd be like, cheat! And, but.
It was funny. This guy I used to work with, he was, I told you he came from Puerto Rico, so like we had cottages, right? And the cottages were all like tree names, right? And so like there was maple, there was spruce, there was oak, willow, right? So we had the 4 cottages, and every time he said spruce, he said spruce. he could never say just the word spruce. And I remember one day going like, why do you, and he was like, oh, in Spanish, it's like hard to, because it's like S, like when you say something. And then he was like, so it doesn't make, like, even though he was like,
your brain is not wired
he was
that way.
like, so it's like, I can speak English, but in that aspect, it's like, I'm still, learning Spanish. And I asked him, I was like, can you teach me Spanish? Like, because I was like, maybe I could roll my R's then. Like,